Alright, welcome back from spring break. We're going to go ahead and begin our week 10 lecture. This week we're going to talk about campaign financing and voting. So there's going to be a lot to talk about today. We're going to be doing a lot with money and politics, and then we're also going to talk about the right to vote and what all that requires. When we talk about campaign financing, there's going to be certain times where I'm going to stop the lecture, and I want you guys to actually click on the link and follow the lecture. I'm also going to load up all the links onto Angel if you haven't already seen that folder. So whenever I say stop and watch this video, please stop my YouTube video, open up a new tab, and open up the link that I am directing you towards. So should be an easy to follow lecture. Shouldn't be too long. However, the other videos will add a few extra minutes, but it'll be well worth your time. I hope you guys can learn a lot about money and politics and just how much money it does cost to actually run for political office these days. So let's go ahead and begin. We're going to first begin about funding election campaigns and where does the money come from. And the truth is that there's a lot of money in politics today, and it costs a lot of money to run, as you will see later today. But there's a lot of sources from which this funding can come. The very first one is individual donations. This tends to be the largest source of funds. A lot of individuals contribute to political campaigns, whether they're only chipping in, say, $10 or $15. That does add up if a lot of people do it, and a lot of people do actually contribute to campaigns, particularly during presidential elections. Those years tend to see a spike in numbers and how many people are actually donating to political campaigns. Contributions from political action committees are also another major source of funds. We're going to talk a lot about political action committees, and in particular super PACs, which I've included at the very bottom there under other groups. But political action committees are one of the main sources of funds, and they're one of the more modern sources of funds for sure. And as I've noted here, it's the second most important source of funds, as a lot of money actually does come from political action committees. Well, I'll also refer to them as PACs. So anytime later in the lecture when I say PACs, I'm referring to political action committees themselves. Political party contributions are very important as well. There tends to be a limited amount limited amounts funded by committees within a political party. But still, political parties do contribute to candidates, particularly candidates that they believe can win. If it's a viable candidate, someone that can actually win a seat, the party is usually willing to give them more money than, say, a candidate that they know are instantly going to lose. So that's why Republicans contribute a lot of money into Texas candidates, but the Democrats don't really tend to contribute a lot of money into Texas candidates. But the opposite could be said for California, where the Democrats do pour a lot of money into California, but the Republicans don't really pour a whole lot of money into California. And then public funding. This is actually kind of an extinct form of funding, as you'll see here in just a little bit. But public funding comes from the federal governments through income taxes that they've raised. They can then give that to candidates that are running for president. But we're going to talk a little bit more about public funding in just a little bit and how it's kind of an extinct form now. And then, as I noted in other groups, we're going to talk about those a lot today, super PACs and 501c4s and 527s. I know that kind of means nothing to you right now, but hopefully later in the lecture it will make more sense. So let's go ahead and begin with the Federal Election Commission. The Federal Election Commission is the body of the federal government that is charged with overseeing every aspect of federal elections. It's an independent regulatory agency, and like I said, it administers and enforces federal campaign finance laws. The FEC has jurisdiction over the financing of campaigns for the U.S. House, the U.S. Senate, and the presidency, and the vice presidency. So any federal office, they are charged with overseeing the campaign financing for those elections. Federal campaign finance law covers three broad subjects. First, it covers public disclosure of funds raised and spent to influence federal elections. So it's charged with making sure that all public financial records are disclosed and available to the public so that you can see who's donating to who. Federal campaign finance law also covers the restrictions on contributions and expenditures made to influence federal elections, and then it's also charged with public financing of presidential campaigns. This last bit here, the public financing of presidential campaigns, is kind of extinct and not really used anymore, but we at least need to discuss what it is. Public financing of presidential campaigns is done through income tax. It's financed by those who agree to use $3 of their income taxes to finance presidential campaigns. So how this happens is every time you file your income taxes, you'll see on the income tax form that there's a little box, and you can just check this little box and it'll give $3 to this public pool of money that could be used for presidential campaigns. So you just check it off. There's other options as well. I believe you can contribute $3 to the National Parks Foundation, to wildlife preservation, to other general causes that are out there. But you can also check this box for $3 of your taxes to finance presidential campaigns. Today, only 11% of taxpayers check off the box because public financing really isn't used anymore, so people don't really feel like they should contribute to it. 2 decades ago, 28% of people used to check off that box, which is a significant amount. If 28% of the American population checks off $3, it adds up to quite a bit of money. But today, only 11% of taxpayers do it. Now, as I've kind of mentioned before, the checkoff dollars are given only to presidential candidates who demonstrate broad-based public support. So that tends to be only the Democrats or the Republicans, the Republicans. Sorry, I misspoke there. The Democrats or the Republicans, and it's defined as those who in the primary elections raise over $55,000 in each of 20 states. So, like I said, each of 20 states, $5,000. Usually, only the Democrats and the Republicans have that kind of support. General election nominees must agree not to accept any private contributions. So if you take this public funding, you can accept large private contributions, but it costs so much money to run for president nowadays that people really don't want to accept the public funding because they want the amount of money that is in private financing of campaigns. If you do accept the private funding, or if you do accept the public funding, candidates must promise not to spend more than $50,000 of their own money. That's if they accept public funding. If they accept private funding, they can spend more than $50,000 of their own money. And then finally, recipients of public funds must adhere to limit on total spending. There's actually a cap on spending if you accept public funding. There's no cap on funding if you accept private funding only. So that's just the general idea of public funding and how that works. How much does it cost to run for president? Costs quite a bit, and this is why candidates tend to be wary of accepting public funds. Now, the first example that I have here for you is the Bush versus Kerry election, where George W. Bush raised around $345 million. Kerry raised $310 million. And this was in the 2004 election. In the 2004 election, there was actually a viable third candidate. You had Ralph Nader, who raised around $5 million. So quite a bit of money is going into these presidential elections, and that was in 2004. Let's also go to 2008. 2008 cost even more. You had Barack Obama and you had John McCain. John McCain actually chose to accept public funding. So because he's accepted public funding, he had a cap on how much he could spend out of his own personal amount. He also had a cap on how much he could accept from private donations. So John McCain accepted public funding. He raised around $84 million in public financing during the general election. Barack Obama rejected public funding. This was the very first time a presidential candidate had rejected public funding. Barack Obama raised around $730 million, or actually he spent $730 million. He rejected public financing, so he didn't have a cap on anything, on his own money or the private contributions that he could raise. And since he didn't have a cap, he could go beyond what John McCain could. John McCain capped his spending at $333 million. Barack Obama could spend unlimited amounts, and so therefore he almost doubled what John McCain spent in the 2008 election. So Barack Obama was able to spend more and also subsequently won the election. And so often what you'll see in these little stats here is that the opponent who spends more often wins. So $730 million, one of the highest amounts of money that had been spent on a presidential election. But then let's flip to 2012. 2012, you had even more. 2012, you had Barack Obama, who spent $1.1 billion, Mitt Romney, who spent $928 million. Both of them had actually rejected public funding, therefore they were able to spend a large amount of money. Now the totals above do include the super PAC money, which we're going to talk about where that comes from here in just a little bit, and then also National Party and other spending is included in this. But like I said, both of them rejected public funding, so they were able to spend quite a bit of money. Mitt Romney was actually the first Republican to reject public financing. John McCain, his predecessor to the Republican nomination, spent public funding. He was the first Republican to reject public funding, Mitt Romney was, and therefore he was able to spend quite a bit. And then Barack Obama rejected public funding in 2008. He saw that it worked, did the same thing in 2012. So Barack Obama became the first incumbent president to reject public financing and was able to spend over $1 billion. So that's 2012. We're spending over $1 billion, almost $2 billion to become president. What's it going to be like in 2016? 2016 is coming upon us. The fact is that some predictions say that the 2016 presidential race could cost over $5 billion. We don't know who the nominees are yet. It's looking like Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side, although she may have some challengers from Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden, or even Bernie Sanders. And then on the Republican side, there's a whole slew of candidates. You can just Google 2016 Republican race, and then you'll kind of see the changing polls every day. Some say Chris Christie, Rand Paul is also a hot name. Texas has 2 representatives in Ted Cruz and Rick Perry. And then there's other nominees such as Jeb Bush or Mike Huckabee. So there's quite a few Republican nominations in 2016 right now. But that being said, they're already spending money. They're on the campaign trail, and so the total for the 2016 presidential race could cost over $5 billion. $5 billion. I know that I don't have that money. I know that you probably don't have that money, and so that's why there's so much money into politics. And to get into politics in the very first place, you have to have quite a bit of money. So we need to talk about sources of donations. Obviously, no one has $5 billion of their own money to run. You need to think about where you're going to get that money from. And there's plenty of sources. We already talked about a few of them, and we're just going to rehash them in further detail. Like I said, the very first primary source, one of the largest sources of campaign funding, is just from individual contributions. You have individual contributions that are set at a $2,500 limit to a specific candidate in the primary, runoff, and general election. So you can spend $2,500 in the primary election. You can spend $2,500 in a runoff election if there is one, and then you can also spend $2,500 in the general election. So the individual contributions amount to quite a bit, could total over $7,000 or more, but generally it's only around $5,000. Now that's individual donations to a campaign. Also, as an individual, you can contribute up to $5,000 per year to any national political action committee. So you can contribute $5,000 to each individual campaign if you wanted to, which is quite a bit of money when you consider how many campaigns there are out there. And then if you're donating to a specific political action committee, you can donate an additional $5,000. And then if that's not enough for you, if you have some excess money to spend, I know I certainly don't, you probably don't, but if you do, you can actually contribute $30,800 per year to any party committee. So if you want to contribute to the Democrats or the Republicans, or maybe even a third party such as the Libertarians or the Greens, you can donate an additional $30,800 per year to any party committee. So all of that added up is quite a bit of money, and it's certainly more money than I make per year, probably more money than you make per year as well. But when you think about all the campaigns and all the political action committees and all that sort of thing, as an individual, you can actually donate a lot of money. And so a lot of people actually do have that excess money, particularly those in the 1% or even the top 20%. Those people have a fair amount of wealth, and so they're able to contribute and influence politics quite a bit. Now, individuals are contributing quite a bit, but that being said, there's even more wealthy people out there that want to contribute more. And that's where McCutcheon versus the Federal Election Commission comes in. It's no longer a case pending before the U.S. court. It actually did pass, and it ruled that these limits should be expanded just a little bit. So McCutcheon versus the Federal Election Commission, individuals can contribute just a little bit more than this, but the key decision is actually the Citizens United case, which we're going to talk about here in just a little bit. So keep McCutcheon in mind, but actually when we get to Citizens United, please keep that case in mind. That is the case that has had the most impact on campaign financing. So these are the individual limits, and individuals do contribute quite a bit. Not all of them contribute to the full limit, obviously, because not all of us have this money. But that being said, those that chip in $5, $10, $15, they can impact elections if there's a lot of them doing that sort of thing. If a lot of them are sort of just chipping in what they can, then those total numbers, granted that there's around 300 million people in the United States, those people that are chipping in money at such a rate are actually influencing the election as well. But what really influences the election is political action committees and super PACs. So let's go ahead and talk about political action committees first. Political action committees came about as sort of a loophole. First you had the Tillman Act and the Taft-Hartley Act of 1907 and 1947 respectively. Both of these acts prohibit the contribution of campaign finances from corporations and labor unions respectively. So Tillman Act in 1907 prohibited campaign finances from corporations. Taft-Hartley Act limited campaign contributions from labor unions. So both of these acts restrict corporations and labor unions. Now you still had the individual limits that were set forth by the FEC. They also kind of restricted campaign donations in a sort of way. And so companies kind of looked at this and said, well, we can't contribute to campaigns directly. How can we contribute to campaigns? Because we're corporations and we're labor unions. We have vested interest in how the election turns out. Well, they created this loophole. What they did was they created what is called a political action committee nowadays, or a PAC. They created a PAC. This PAC is just a separate political fund off to the side. It's a separate political fund, usually given a different name, but somewhat related to the company. And companies would throw their money into this political action committee and say that, no, it's the political action committee that's donating to campaigns. They use this newly created organization of a PAC to donate to candidates. So they're giving their money to this political action committee, but then the political action committee is giving the money to the campaign. And when it comes down to the law, it's the political action committee is the one giving them the money, not the corporation. So this was a loophole for corporations and labor unions to give money to candidates. Now, political action committees donate quite a bit of money to campaigns, and individuals contribute to PACs greatly. You can see here that an individual can contribute $2,500 individually to a campaign, and then throw $5,000 into each PAC, and then those PACs can give that money to campaigns. Now it's regulated. This dollar amount is regulated, but often not enforced. So it's kind of a tricky little loophole, and it's a way to kind of get around the FEC so that they don't really find anything in connection, sort of thing. So at this time, if I didn't make enough sense of PACs, I want you to pause my video. Please pause my video right now and watch the Colbert PAC video. He explains what a PAC is, and he sets up his own PAC on the air. And so it's really entertaining. It'll give you a sense of what a PAC is and how it kind of operates and things like that. So watch the Stephen Colbert video. It's very informative on PACs, so pause the video right now. Alright, so hopefully you watched the Stephen Colbert video. If not, I guess I can't really tell because I'm just making this all in one shot, but I have watched all the Colbert PAC videos. So hopefully you watched it, hopefully you found it entertaining, and let's talk about now the evolution of PACs. People looked at PACs and saw the campaign donation limits, and they didn't really like that all that much, particularly if you were part of a corporation or a labor union, you wanted to actually spend more on campaigns. And so please give the rise to the super PACs, 527s and 501c4s. PACs themselves, PACs raise money and give to parties and individual candidates. And PACs can be operated by any sort of group. So as you saw, Stephen Colbert created his own PAC, and he called it the Colbert PAC, and he operated and oversaw everything. Now, remember, PACs have limits on donations. Limits of donations, $5,000 to any candidate committee per election, primary, general, or special. So it has this $5,000 cap. And a lot of corporations, labor unions looked at that and said, hey, we actually want to contribute more. So it entered the 527s and the 501c4 groups. Now, this may not make sense quite yet, but when you watch the next Colbert video, it'll make a little bit more sense. 527s and 501c4s, they have no limits on donations. And they have no limit on spending either. Now, the 527s and the 501c4s, they can't actually coordinate with any party or group, but they can give to a party or group. They just can't say that we operate or we kind of coordinate with a party or a candidate. We're just kind of off on the side. We're just giving them money because we support them. We don't actually coordinate with them at all. And 527s and 501c4s cannot explicitly advocate a vote for a candidate. They can run a lot of negative advertising against candidates' opponents that they don't support, but they can't actually say vote for this candidate. And this will make a little bit more sense here in just a little bit. So 527s and 501c4s, they're kind of the same, but they're not at the same time. 527s are explicitly political groups. They have a political message, and they have a political kind of mission statement, if you will. 527s, because they're explicitly political, require donor disclosure. Now, if you donate to a 527, 527s then have to report your name to the FEC. 501c4s, on the other hand, are really nice. 501c4s, they're just what are called social welfare organizations or non-profit organizations. Political activity is not their main goal. Political activity has to comprise of less than 50% of their overall activity. They must be involved in other educational activities. Now, this can be really vague or it can be really specific what their educational activity is. And also 501c4s don't have any donor disclosure requirements. Because they're a non-profit, because they're just a social welfare organization, they don't require donor disclosure. They don't have to disclose who their donors are. So if you donate to a 501c4, your name is not going to be reported to the FEC. Corporations looked at 501c4s and said, oh, this is the way to go. We can donate millions of dollars through a 501c4, have that 501c4 give our money to a political candidate, and they'll never know that we actually donated to the 501c4. 501c4s and 527s are kind of a combination, and they ultimately form what are called super PACs. So, super PACs themselves, this is where we get in super PACs. 527s and 501c4s combine to make super PACs. Super PACs are independent expenditure-only committees, and Colbert will explain this better in the video just a little bit than I will here, because he actually has a FEC lawyer on his side there, so he'll be able to explain a lot more. But super PACs are independent expenditure-only committees. Independent expenditure-only committees means basically we're only spending money to take out advertising and things like that. Super PACs may raise unlimited sums of money, as I mentioned in the 527s, 501c4s, from corporations, unions, associations, and individuals. So, super PACs are allowed to take in that money and be able and not disclose their donors. So that's how many corporations and wealthy individuals are influencing the election nowadays. They're just giving their money to 501c4s, which then give it to candidates to advocate on their behalf. Super PACs spend unlimited sums to overtly advocate for or against political candidates. Super PACs must report their donors to the Federal Election Committee, however, not if you're a 501c4. And super PACs are prohibited from donating money directly to political candidates, but they will take out advertising for that candidate and things like that. So, at this time, pause my video. If that did not make any sense, if super PACs are really confusing, go ahead and watch the first Colbert video. He'll explain kind of what a super PAC is. He has to set up his own super PAC, and he'll kind of explain the law behind it just a little bit. So pause the video right now. Alright, cool. Hopefully you watched the Colbert video. If not, I guess I don't really know. But thanks to Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission, this is the main Supreme Court case that I really care that you know about for the test. I can guarantee this will be on the test. Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission, which Colbert mentioned in that first video, was a Supreme Court case. It was a landmark Supreme Court case. Many people were up in arms after the Citizens United case came down. A lot of people were happy, though, that being said as well. The Supreme Court held in the Citizens United versus the FEC that the First Amendment prohibited the government from restricting independent political expenditures by corporations and unions. Basically, what this case said was that corporations are people. People, under the First Amendment, have the right to free speech. Corporations don't necessarily have a voice. Corporations express themselves through money and spending money. So therefore, because corporations are people, and people have freedom of speech and spend money, corporations also have the right to freedom of speech and to spend money through elections and campaigns. So that's why corporations are spending so much money, pouring so much money into these 527s and these 501c4s and these super PACs to basically influence elections and exercise their right to free speech. Now, there's going to be a discussion board question whether you actually agree that corporations are people and that corporations should have a right to spend unlimited sums of money on elections, and I definitely want to hear your opinion on that. But I'm just kind of presenting the facts to you that this is how it is now, that corporations are allowed to spend unlimited amounts of money, on federal elections. So, independent expenditures. That's what super PACs do. Super PACs are responsible for taking care of independent expenditures. An independent expenditure is money spent by a group not connected to a candidate's campaign, and it's usually negative advertising. Negative advertising is a way to attack a candidate's opponents, but not necessarily advocate for that candidate himself. Advertising must be done independently, not in coordination with another candidate or a candidate's campaign, and you must never mention vote for. So that's why I want you guys to go ahead and watch this Newt Gingrich video and note how that it's done by a Mitt Romney PAC or a Mitt Romney super PAC, but never once in the ad does it say vote for Mitt Romney. It just says Newt Gingrich is a terrible, terrible guy. You shouldn't vote for him. Now that tears down another candidate, but in the back of most people that are watching that ad's mind are saying, well, okay, then Mitt Romney's actually kind of a good guy compared to Newt Gingrich. I guess I'll go vote for Mitt Romney. So it's a great example. The Newt Gingrich ad is actually kind of soft compared to many other ads, believe it or not. The Newt Gingrich ad kind of doesn't tear him down as much as other ads have. You can say anything basically with this independent expenditure thing. You can basically say that the other man is a serial killer and that he murders babies or something like that, and then it's okay because it's just an independent expenditure. No one else is explicitly saying vote for somebody else. They're just saying that guy's terrible. Look at him. He's murdering babies and he's a serial killer. So Newt Gingrich faced Mitt Romney in the 2012 presidential primary, and so that's why this is a Mitt Romney ad tearing down another Republican, Newt Gingrich, who's running against Mitt Romney at this time. So it's a great example. Go ahead and watch the video. Pause my video right now. Alright, so you saw the Newt Gingrich ad, hopefully, if you pause the video. If not, that's okay. But when you think about super PACs and how they're required for they're required for independent expenditures, which means negative advertising basically, this is exactly why the rise of negative advertising has gone up. Because super PACs are now allowed to take out so much negative advertising and expend so much on negative advertising that it's kind of dominating the election cycle now. Remember this graph from last week's lecture, or from the lecture before spring break. You had back here in 2000, super PACs weren't a thing yet. People were spending money on advertising, but a lot of it was actually positive. Around 40% of it was positive, and only 30% of it was negative. In 2012, you have the Citizens. In 2010, actually, you have the Citizens United case, and then the 2012 election was the first presidential election with the influence of super PACs. Super PACs are allowed to take out independent expenditures, which means negative advertising, and that's why negative advertising has increased so much. Negative advertising now around 65% of the election cycle, and then positive messages only consist of around 15%. And remember, I gave you that stat last week or the week before spring break that around 90% of ads are at some point negative in their advertising now, and that's also because of the influence of super PACs as well. So negative advertising has taken off so much, and a lot of it has to do with the super PACs themselves and them spending so much money on those independent expenditures and negative advertising. Now, enter the corporations as well. Corporations are a little bit weary and just a little bit. And so go ahead, pause my video right now and watch this Colbert Super PAC Part 2. This will explain how they set up a shell corporation so that the money trail cannot be found back to a corporation. So pause my video right now. Alright, so hopefully you pause my video, you watch the Colbert Super PAC Part 2. Colbert Super PAC Part 2 is actually really good. It shows how Stephen has to set up a shell corporation so that the money can never be traced back to him. This is exactly what corporations did. And it's because corporations were really worried that they were going to donate to a political campaign. Consumers would look at that. Consumers would say, wow, I really don't agree with that corporation's principles. I'm going to take my business elsewhere. So because of the donor disclosure requirements for 527s, corporations were really cautious to donate to 527s. Instead, the 501c4s looked much more appealing. The creation of 501c4 groups spurred the influx of more corporate donations because they could donate to this 501c4. This 501c4 didn't have to disclose their donors. The 501c4 could then contribute and exercise those independent expenditures on behalf of that corporation. Corporations were kind of wary even then still, so enter the idea of shell corporations. Shell corporations are corporations that didn't have any physical operations. They were just a corporation set somewhere, usually in Delaware. These corporations could set up a C4, or 501c4 in their name, and then use any donations to contribute to their super PAC. This allowed anonymous donations and unlimited funds. So now all the corporate money is spilling into politics, into the elections, and there's no way to trace any of this money back to the original corporation. So this allows corporations to spend unlimited money on elections and never have their business really influenced because people can't trace the money back to them to begin with. So I believe in that last video there's a part where Colbert goes, what's the difference between this and money laundering? The fact is there's not a whole lot that's different between money laundering and what corporations are doing now to influence elections. So you can kind of see how much money is being poured into elections. We're spending over $2 billion just to become elected president, and corporations are definitely bumping those numbers up quite a bit. So just want to give you an example real quick. We've talked a lot about 527s, 501c4s. Hopefully it's all made a little bit of sense now. And now you can kind of see how much money is in politics and how super PACs are influencing the political landscape. So I just wanted to give you a quick example real quick. This is Karl Rove. Karl Rove was a Republican strategist under the Bush administration. And after he was done at the Bush administration, he set up what he called American Crossroads. And American Crossroads is a super PAC. But Crossroads GPS, which stands for Grassroots Policy Strategies, is a nonprofit 501c4 that is not required to report their contributions to or contributors to the FEC. So he has the American Crossroads, which is a super PAC, but then his Crossroads GPS is a 501c4. So a lot of corporations, particularly those that tend to agree on with the Republicans and the more conservative side, donate quite heavily to Karl Rove's Crossroads GPS. Crossroads GPS, being a 501c4, does not require donor disclosure. And so corporations and wealthy individuals will actually donate to Crossroads GPS, which will then filter it into the super PAC for them. So that's just an example of one super PAC. Crossroads GPS and American Crossroads is actually one of the largest super PACs in the United States. So I just want to kind of give you an idea of how that operates. So let's go into the 2012 numbers. Remember, 2012 was the very first time there was a super PAC, or the very first time after Citizens United versus the FEC, that we were kind of really allowed to see the influence of super PACs. So what you're going to see here is that a lot of these super PACs are actually on the Republican side. Now there's maybe two reasons for that. One, Republicans tend to represent corporate interest and represent the top 1% in their operations and things like that. So Republicans are able to gain a lot of money from their super PACs and things like that. And also the other reason is that Republicans actually ran a primary in 2012, so their super PACs had to raise a lot of money to not only win the primary, but then also in the general election. So there was actually two elections basically for the Republicans, which was another reason why they were able to raise so much money. So in 2012, this is kind of the rundown of the top 12 most expensive super PACs. And the very first one was Restore Our Future. Restore Our Future was a Mitt Romney super PAC, and they raised over $142 million, or spent over $142 million on the 2012 election. You can see here, I don't know if it appears really well on your screen or not, but right here it says 90% of their spending was spent on attack ads, and they represented 33% of all Republican spending. So it's quite a bit of money that Restore Our Future spent. In second place is American Crossroads, the one we just mentioned, run by Karl Rove, spent $91 million. 93% of their money was spent on attack ads. but they didn't have a particular candidate. They were just all for, they basically advocating for any Republican candidate that ran against Barack Obama. Now, number 3, though, you finally do have a Democrat here. Priorities USA Action, $66 million. They spent all their money on attack ads. 100% of their money was spent on attack ads. So, very interesting strategy there. And number 4, also a Republican, super PAC, or not a super PAC, sorry, a Republican National Committee, the Republican Party itself, not a super PAC itself, but they are rank in the top 4 because they had to run the primary, plus they had to run the general election. They appear in the top 4 of independent expenditures, and they spent $42 million. So I'm going to kind of go through these next slides quick. Those are the rundown of the top 4. You can see the 5 through 8, also Republican. Newt Gingrich appears on this slide here, and you can see millions of dollars from $33 million to $17 million. And then I also have 9 through 12. The 9th place spent $15 million. The 12th place, Rick Santorum Super PAC, spent $7 million. So, millions of dollars from the top 1 through 12. I believe 11 out of 12 of them are Republican because one is the fact that they represent corporate interests quite a bit, so corporations are willing to donate to Republican super PACs, and then also the fact that they had to run 2 elections, so they had to spend a lot more money on the 2012 elections than the Democrats. So just gives you an idea of how much money really is in politics. If you want to review the numbers, it adds up to quite a bit. So this is the basic impact of the Citizens United decision overall. If you want an excellent analysis is found on the website for Open Secrets. Open Secrets is basically a transparency website. They want to make sure that the public has all the information on money and politics and things like that. But you can see that outside spending, the main stat that I found really amazing is that outside spending rose 338% since 2006. So since 2006, you have vast amount of outside spending from individual donations, from super PAC donations, from the original PACs themselves, and from the party themselves. The parties that are starting to spend a lot more money on politics themselves as well. So it increases 338% since 2006, and no longer is public funding really accepted, which then basically makes the barriers of donations unlimited. Whereas, remember, with the public funding, which we talked about a long time ago, it seems like already, there's a cap on it. Private donations, there's no cap, and that's why outside spending has rose so much, and particularly since Citizens United, corporate spending on elections has increased quite a bit. So hopefully that gives you guys an idea of how much money influences politics and how much money it does cost to actually become involved in politics itself. So what happens to all this super PAC money? What happens when a super PAC closes? Like Colbert had to close his own super PAC. What happens to the super PAC contributions after the election? Go ahead and click on this link, Colbert Super PAC Part 3. He has to close his super PAC, or he wants to close his super PAC, and he has to find out how to do that. So go ahead and watch this video. It'll make you a little bit envious of how much money is in politics and how much money you could probably profit from being in politics. So pause my video and watch that video right now. Alright, cool. Hopefully you pause my video and you watch that one. Colbert Super PAC Part 3. Very interesting stuff. I'm not sure what happened to his money from his super PAC, but you can go on his website. I think he has the explanation of where his money went to. So, enough about campaign financing and campaigns themselves. Let's talk now about the actual act of voting. Voting is an essential part of American politics, and even despite all that money that is being spent on politics, the act of voting is actually what counts, and votes do count and add up. Now, how much money actually influences the role of voting is kind of questionable, but the fact that people still have to go out and vote is a huge part. So let's talk about voting itself. Let's just first begin with current qualifications to vote in the United States. Or actually, this is for Texas, since we are in Texas ourselves. I guess I gave the extra kind of shout out to Texas here. So current qualifications to vote: you have to be 18 years of age, you have to be a U.S. citizen, and then to vote in Texas, you have to have been a resident of Texas for 30 days. So you have to have lived in Texas for at least 30 days. You must be a resident of the county for 30 days that you lived in. So if you're living in Galveston County right now, which I believe most of you are, you have to have at least lived in Galveston County for 30 days. You cannot be a current felon, Texas felons can vote, though, after completing their sentence. So just don't be a current felon and you can still vote. And you must be deemed mentally competent. So that just means that the court, if you've ever been in court, you must have not been declared mentally incompetent. So you must be mentally, I guess, aware legally, I guess, if you want to put it that way. So those are your current qualifications to vote here in Texas. I will have a question on the test about your current qualifications. You just have to pick the one that isn't one of these bullet points here, and whichever one isn't is your correct answer there. So there you go. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about suffrage, though. So those are the current qualifications to vote. And while we think that everyone has kind of the right to vote in America, the fact is that traditionally and historically, America has not granted the right to vote to every citizen. The initial standards were established by the states. Each state had to set up its own standards, and then whatever those standards were was allowed to kind of continue until certain amendments were passed. And in many ways, states are still fighting the battle for the equal right to vote and things like that. And moreover, many states continued barring people from practices until these amendments were passed. So let's go ahead and talk about the amendments themselves. Suffrage amendments. The 15th Amendment was the one that barred voting restrictions on race. So regardless of race, now you could vote. Now, granted, that was the 15th Amendment, and that was passed a long, long time ago, but even up until the 1960s and 1970s, states were barring people from voting based on race. And that's because of the federalism issue. Remember when we talked about federalism? States states are the ones that oversee elections. So therefore, states can make their own election rules in disregard to the amendments themselves. So the 15th Amendment was highly controversial at the time in the South, particularly in the South. They didn't really like that all that much. And so they set up certain laws like the Jim Crow laws or the literacy tests and poll taxes and things like that to kind of bar out the 15th Amendment, if you will. The 19th Amendment prohibited restricting voting based on sex, so this was the women's suffrage amendment. The 24th Amendment, passed many years later after the race amendment, eliminated poll taxes. Poll taxes were one way that the South prevented minorities from voting. And the rest of the United States kind of looked at that and said, hey, that's really unfair. It's preventing minorities from voting because they can't afford this poll tax. We should eliminate the poll tax. So the United States passed that amendment. States had to abide by it. And then finally, the 26th Amendment. 26th Amendment raised or kind of lowered the age to vote. Now 18-year-olds could vote. And the idea behind that was that during this time, during the passage of the 26th Amendment, many 18-year-olds were going over to Vietnam and fighting for their country. And they're fighting for their country, therefore they should also have the right to vote in their country. The idea was that you can't send these people to war and then give them no right to vote for the people who are sending them to war in the first place. So that's the 26th Amendment, and now you only have to be 18 years or older to vote. The Voting Rights Act was another one. The Voting Rights Act was one that did away with literacy tests. You can no longer require literacy tests. It's not an amendment itself, but it's an act, and therefore they're binding by federal law. So all states have to abide by that and ensure that there's no literacy test or other barriers to bar them from voting. And then there's various other court decisions. There's too many to name that have dealt with voting and the right to vote itself. So just kind of giving you an idea of the evolution of how voting has taken off in the United States. Now, as I mentioned, we had a lot of previous restrictions on suffrage, and a lot of initial ones were set up by the states, such as property ownership, then barring suffrage on the basis of race, poll taxes. You had lengthy residency requirements, and you also had literacy tests. And so these were all previous restrictions on suffrage. Earlier restrictions on the franchise, people that could vote, once again, the poll tax. The poll tax was a hefty amount of money, to be honest. It was equal to several days' wages for a farm worker. And it had to be paid in advance of Election Day. So therefore, farmers had to go into town, pay the poll tax before Election Day, go back to their farm, and then go back into town later on to vote. So it's kind of a way to restrict farmers, particularly subsistence farmers of minority status. This was a way to restrict them from voting. Politicians would often pay the fees of poor voters, which kind of had a corrupting feel to it. If politicians were paying your right to vote, then obviously you're going to vote for the person that paid for your right to vote. It was kind of a barrier to participation in representation. Minority candidates were not viable if minorities could not vote for them. So that's why politics was dominated predominantly by landowning white males at that time, because it was a barrier. The poll tax was a barrier to participation and also representation. This was banned by the 24th Amendment in 1964, like I talked about. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was another one that kind of tore down a barrier to race in terms of voting. The Voting Rights Act 1965 eliminates the literacy test and other such devices in states or counties where less than 50% of the voting age population was registered by November 1st, 1964. So, in 1970, all literacy tests were outlawed. And now, if this was an in-person class, I'd actually pause the class right now and have you guys take a literacy test. They're very interesting to take. You can Google them and see if you can pass one. It's almost impossible to pass, even as a literate as a literate scholar, I guess I'll call myself. They're very, very difficult to pass. So, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 got rid of all these literacy tests, and they also makes it illegal to pass a major that has voting discrimination as its purpose. So that's the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It expanded the franchise and expanded suffrage for those that were barred from voting based on literacy tests or other reasons that the states established. That being said, we're still fighting the right to vote today, and there's recent efforts to limit voting, and one of them would be the photo ID laws. Now, there's pros and cons to the photo ID laws, and I'm going to have you guys hash that out in your own discussion board. Now, photo ID laws, on one hand, are good because it's good to know that you're actually a citizen of where you're voting. Now, they're a con because a lot of them tend to focus on urban areas and things like that, where getting a photo ID is particularly difficult. So, but I'll let you weigh through the pros and cons yourselves, and I definitely want you guys to at least Google search them just a little bit. So, other efforts to limit voting are reduced opportunities for voting, reduction of early voting opportunities, and then inadequate polling places, a lot of long lines. If you want to watch this Florida video, you probably should, but you don't have to. The Florida voting will give you kind of an idea of how bad it is to vote in Florida. So it's very funny, actually, if you like Florida jokes. So, all right, voter participation. Let's talk about now let's actually talk about who votes. Factors which influence who votes. Age matters quite a bit. If you're elderly or you're a senior citizen, you tend to vote a lot more than young people, particularly of the 18 to 24 demographic. People of the 18 to 24 demographic just generally don't vote as in high of a number as elderly voters or senior citizens. Education matters. Those that are more educated vote more than those people who have just a high school education. Race and ethnic lines. Caucasians vote more than minorities, and then the second most race or ethnicity to vote is Black or African Americans, followed third by Hispanics and fourth by Asian Americans. Income level, the more wealthy you are, the more you tend to vote, because tax policies and so forth tend to affect you more often. Party competition, if there's a high level of competition between the two parties, more people turn out to vote. And then government employment, there are certain government employment restrictions. If you work for the federal government, you have certain restrictions based on your need to be a bureaucratic agent. So, something to consider as well if you're considering a job in the federal government itself. How does a voter decide to vote? Once again, many of the same factors. This tends to influence how you vote, whether you vote Democrat or whether you vote Republican. If you were this was an in-person class, I think I would actually go through all of these just a little bit more. But education, more educated tends to be more liberal leaning, more Democratic leaning. Less educated tends to be more Republican and conservative leaning. Income and socioeconomic status. If you're wealthy, you tend to vote more conservative and Republican leaning. If you're lower income status, you tend to vote more Democratic. Religion, race, and gender and geographic region all have to do with how you tend to vote. We would go through a lot more detail if this was actually a class discussion itself, but I'm sure you can sort out a lot of these yourself. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about voter turnout. Voter turnout is a huge issue in Texas. Texas turnout rates are very low when it comes to election time. Usually Texas ranks among the bottom 5 states on this metric, how many people actually turn out to vote. Texas ranks very, very low. And this is actually interesting because it's across all racial and ethnic groups in Texas. They all have lower voter turnout rates compared to the national average and relative to most other states. Despite the ease of voter registration, to register to vote in Texas is very, very easy. A lot of you did it for your extra credit, so good job. And voting processes are very easy in Texas as well. Turnout remains low, but despite the ease of voter registration and the voting process itself, people just don't want to turn out in Texas to vote. This is a nice little chart that shows you where Texas ranks. If you can't find Texas, I'll allow you to pause the video right now, and I dare you to try to find Texas. Here among the first, though, is Minnesota. Minnesota and Wisconsin ranked number 1 and 2 in 2008. In 2012, they ranked 1 and 2 again. Minnesota and Wisconsin turn out in high numbers. And Wisconsin is also seen as a swing state. Sometimes it goes red, sometimes it goes blue. Usually it goes blue, but sometimes it actually does go red. And so Wisconsin having a high voter turnout at number 2 is huge, particularly in terms of a swing state. If you haven't found Texas yet, I will point it out to you right now. Texas is right here at 48th. It was 47th in 08. So it went actually down 1 in 2012. It ranked 48th in 2012. Not a lot of people turn out in Texas. Trying to find my home state of Kansas. My home state of Kansas is right here at 36th. It was 28 in 2008, 36th in 2012. So pretty far down there. But Texas, even further down, and this may be the reason why. Forgive me, sorry, I forgot I had the slide. Skip ahead one. Factors associated with Texas low turnout. There's no statewide party competition. Quite frankly, Texas is a deep red state. There's no party competition, and when parties are actually competing, when there's a tense race, people tend to turn out to vote more because they feel that their vote matters. In Texas, there's no statewide party competition. It's deeply red, so therefore it's deeply Republican, and Republicans are always going to win. Now, this discourages not only Democrats from turning out because they know they're going to lose, it also discourages Republicans from turning out because what does it matter if I turn out? My party's going to win anyway. I just don't think I'll take the time to vote today. And so that's why because there's no statewide party competition, it influences both Democrats and Republicans in their decision to turn out to vote. Moreover, there's little mobilization by either party relative to efforts in other states. Texas just simply isn't a swing state, so why would parties put effort into winning Texas when they already know who's going to win Texas? Moreover, in Texas, there's low socioeconomic status. Texas tends to be a low-income, low-education state, and so low socioeconomic status also factors into the decision to not turn out to vote. And then also Texas, particularly nowadays, has a younger population. It's very young. A lot of people are moving from out-of-state to in-state, or moving from out-of-state into Texas. And then also you have a large, young Hispanic population in Texas as well. So Texas doesn't turn out to vote based on its age. 18 to 24-year-olds just simply don't turn out to vote. And unfortunately for Texas, the largest demographic is 18 to 24-year-olds. So that's one influence on why people don't turn out to vote in Texas. Finally, I just wanted to give you a chart real quick. This is presidential turnout rates for everybody from 1948 to 2012. You can see here in the 50s and in the late 40s and in the 50s, you had a wildly popular candidate within Eisenhower, and then you also had a party competition between Truman and Dewey in 1948. It went down in the 1970s. A lot of people were skeptical of government, particularly after Watergate. A lot of people were skeptical of government, both on the Republicans and the Democratic side. And so not a lot of people turned out to vote in the 1970s. 1980s, it was a Republican-dominated era, so voter turnout was pretty low. Finally, you get to 2008, and you had the first black president, and plus John McCain was wildly popular at the time. It was one of the most covered well, I guess excitement. It had a lot of excitement. It was one of the most exciting elections in a long time. So in 2008, you had quite a lot of people actually turn out to vote. 2012 went down. 2016, I guess we'll see. And we'll probably have our first woman presidential candidate. Plus, on the Republican side, you're going to have a harsh primary, and a lot of people are going to follow that. So there's going to be a lot of media coverage for the Republicans in 2016 as well. So I just kind of want to give you an idea of presidential turnout rates and how they're influenced by particular things. Hopefully that made a lot of sense. All right, so that's the end of the lecture for today. Hope if you have any questions, please send them my way. And we covered a lot of stuff in terms of campaign finance and voting and things like that. If you have any questions, please send them my way. I want to make sure that I make sense so that you guys are prepared for your test. So let's go ahead and talk about your discussion boards. You have 3 discussion board questions here today. And the very first one is I want you to actually research just a little bit on the Citizens United versus the FEC case. I want you to go, I'm going to post a website link to it, and I want you to go and actually read the case itself, if you will. Just read the summaries. You don't have to actually read like the entire wording of the case. But at least review it just a little bit, or Google search it, and let me know what you guys think of it. Do you agree with this ruling? Do you agree that corporations are people? And should corporations be able to spend unlimited money on campaigns? Why or why not? Kind of following that little closely is the second question here. Are you concerned with the amount of money in politics today? Are politicians just are they just wealthy businessmen that are doing business in Washington? Does it dilute the sense of representation? Why or why not? Do you believe that corporations that have all the money are getting all the ears of the politicians, and the common man, such as yourself, common man or woman, I guess you should say, is not getting the ear of the politicians? So does it dilute the sense of representation? Why or why not? And then third, finally, I want you to address the question of voter ID. I want you to research just a little bit of voter ID. Do you believe that states should require a valid form of identification for people to vote? What are the pros and cons of requiring identification? I want you to weigh on both the pros and the cons. I want you to do a little bit of research as well. Think about the demographics that are influenced by this, and think about the overall impact of voter turnout and things like that. Does it discourage people from turning out to vote as well? So, I believe you guys are intuitive enough and can give your opinion on all 3 of these, and I look forward to reading your opinions as well. You guys will have a test here just soon, so keep that in mind as well. But if you have any questions about the lecture or any of the material that we've covered so far in this unit, please send those my way as well. I will go ahead and close out today's lecture, and I hope you guys have a good week. I'll see you guys later.